What if one decision about rice was never really about rice at all? Imagine waking up to discover that one of Africa's poorest nations had chosen to stop relying on imported rice not because it was easy, but because it believed its future depended on producing its own food. At first glance, it sounded like a simple trade policy, but as the days passed, farmers began returning to their fields. Local businesses started preparing for new opportunities, and a much bigger question emerged. Was Burkina Faso simply restricting imports, or was it quietly laying the foundation for an entirely new economic future? Around the world, many countries are still struggling with rising food costs, supply chain disruptions, and growing uncertainty in international trade. Yet, Burkina Faso appears to be testing a different path, one built on local production, domestic industry, and greater food self-reliance. It is a bold experiment, one that carries both significant risks and remarkable possibilities. Supporters believe this could become a turning point, creating jobs not only on farms, but also in rice mills, transportation, packaging, storage, and retail. Critics argue that success will depend on whether local production can meet demand without driving up prices. The answer remains uncertain, but the decision has already sparked debate far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Today, we will explore the facts behind this policy, the people whose lives could be transformed, and the long-term vision that some believe could reshape the country's agricultural economy. If you enjoy thoughtful analysis on Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, and Africa's economic future, subscribe and join us for more in-depth discussions. But here's the question that few people are asking. Was this really a rice policy? Or was it the opening move in a much larger plan to build Africa's next great food economy? For years, rice has been one of the most important foods on the tables of millions of families across Burkina Faso. Yet, despite the hard work of local farmers, a significant share of the rice consumed in the country has traditionally come from imports. Every shipment arriving from abroad represented more than food. It also represented money flowing out of the national economy and a reminder of how vulnerable the country could become whenever global prices rose or supply chains were disrupted. That reality became even more visible as international trade grew increasingly uncertain. Around the world, governments began rethinking food security. Rising transportation costs, changing trade policies, and geopolitical tensions reminded many nations that depending too heavily on imported food could become an expensive risk. Against that backdrop, Burkina Faso announced a decision that immediately captured attention: a suspension of imported rice under a policy intended to strengthen domestic production. The announcement was real, but what came afterward became the true story. Supporters saw the policy as an opportunity rather than a restriction. Their argument was straightforward. If local producers were given stronger demand, they would have greater confidence to invest in better seeds, improved irrigation, modern farming equipment, and higher productivity. More importantly, investors might finally see enough certainty to finance rice mills, storage facilities, transportation networks, and food processing businesses that had struggled to grow while imported products dominated the market. Of course, the strategy also carries important conditions. Expanding local production requires reliable harvests, investment in infrastructure, access to financing, efficient logistics, and stable markets. Without those elements, replacing imports could prove difficult. The long-term outcome depends not only on government policy, but also on the ability of farmers, businesses, and consumers to adapt together. To understand why many people remain hopeful, consider the story of a farmer we will call Musa. For nearly 3 decades, Musa cultivated rice on a small family plot. Every season followed the same pattern. He planted, harvested, and waited for buyers, only to discover that imported rice often reached local markets at prices he struggled to match. Some years he wondered whether farming still had a future for his family. His eldest son even left the village in search of work elsewhere because agriculture no longer seemed to offer opportunity. Then conversations in the community began to change. Instead of asking how much imported rice would arrive, people started asking how much local rice could be produced. Agricultural cooperatives became more active. Local officials discussed expanding storage capacity. Equipment suppliers anticipated growing demand. For the first time in years, Musa believed that producing more rice might actually lead to a better future rather than greater uncertainty. His story reflects something larger than one farmer's experience. Across Burkina Faso, many people are asking the same question. Can a country strengthen its economy not by importing more, but by producing more? That question extends far beyond agriculture. Because if local rice production continues to expand, the next challenge will no longer be growing enough grain. It will be building everything that comes after the harvest. And that is where this story becomes far bigger than anyone expected. If you have followed this journey so far, tell us where you are watching from and share one word that best describes what food independence means to you. Because in the next chapter, we leave the rice fields behind and discover the hidden economic engine that could determine whether this ambitious strategy succeeds or fails. At first, the conversation focused on one question: could Burkina Faso grow enough rice? But that was only the beginning, because growing rice is only the first step. The real value is created after the harvest. Think about what happens the moment a field is ready. The rice must be collected. It must be transported. It must be dried. It must be milled. It must be packaged. It must be stored. It must be delivered to wholesalers, supermarkets, restaurants, and families across the country. Suddenly, one harvest supports dozens of different businesses. One successful farming season creates work for truck drivers, warehouse operators, machine technicians, packaging companies, equipment suppliers, food processors, retailers, and small entrepreneurs who may never plant a single grain of rice themselves. That is why many economists often describe agriculture as more than food production. When supported by investment and efficient infrastructure, it can become the starting point of an entire value chain. And that is exactly why this policy has attracted so much attention. Supporters believe the long-term opportunity is not simply replacing imported rice. They believe the larger opportunity is keeping more of the economic value inside Burkina Faso. Imagine a bag of imported rice arriving at a local market. Most of its economic value has already been created somewhere else. The farmers worked elsewhere. The processing happened elsewhere. The packaging was completed elsewhere. The jobs were created elsewhere. The profits were earned elsewhere. Burkina Faso received the final product. Now imagine the opposite. The rice is planted by local farmers. It is processed inside Burkina Faso. The packaging carries a local brand. The trucks belong to local transport companies. The warehouses employ local workers. The supermarkets sell products produced by their own communities. Instead of one economic transaction, every stage creates another opportunity for income, investment, and employment. That is the vision many supporters describe. Not simply food security, economic circulation, money moving from one Burkinabe business to another instead of leaving the country. For young people searching for work, this idea may be even more important than the rice itself. Not everyone wants to become a farmer. Some want to operate machinery. Some want to design packaging. Others want to build warehouses, repair equipment, develop logistics software, or manage agricultural businesses. A stronger agricultural sector could create opportunities far beyond the fields. That possibility has begun changing conversations in many communities. Instead of asking where the next shipment of imported rice will come from, people are asking where the next rice mill will be built. Instead of discussing only food prices, they are discussing investment, training, technology, and local manufacturing. Across parts of Africa, many observers have long argued that exporting raw materials while importing finished products limits long-term economic growth. Whether discussing minerals, cotton, cocoa, or agricultural products, the same question continues to appear. How much more value could remain inside Africa if more processing happened locally? For supporters of Burkina Faso's strategy, rice has become another example of that broader debate. Not because rice alone can transform an economy, but because one successful industry can encourage confidence in building the next one. If local processing becomes competitive, could maize follow? Could wheat processing expand? Could fruit, vegetables, cooking oil, and livestock industries also benefit from stronger domestic investment? One successful supply chain often encourages another, and that is how industrial transformation sometimes begins. Not with one giant project, but with hundreds of smaller businesses growing together. Still, optimism alone cannot guarantee success. Better harvests must be matched by reliable roads. Modern storage must reduce post-harvest losses. Affordable financing must reach farmers and entrepreneurs. Private investment must continue. Consumers must have confidence in locally produced food. Without those pieces working together, the vision becomes much harder to achieve. But if they do, the impact could extend well beyond agriculture. It could strengthen rural incomes, reduce pressure on imports, support small businesses, create thousands of new jobs across multiple industries, and perhaps most importantly, It could change how an entire generation thinks about economic opportunity, not as something waiting overseas, but as something that can be built at home. That may be the biggest shift of all, because history often remembers great transformations by their final results. Yet they usually begin with one simple decision that seemed ordinary at the time. So the real question is no longer whether Burkina Faso can produce more rice. The bigger question is this: could one agricultural policy become the foundation for a new generation of African industries? Or is this only the first chapter of a much longer journey whose outcome the world has not yet seen? By now, one thing has become clear. This story is no longer about replacing imported rice. It is about changing the direction of an economy. For decades, many developing nations have exported raw products while importing higher value goods. The result has often been familiar. Farmers worked hard, but much of the added value from processing to packaging and distribution was created somewhere else. Burkina Faso appears to be exploring a different approach. The idea is simple in principle, but challenging in practice. Produce more at home, process more at home, sell more products carrying local value, keep more economic activity inside the country. If that approach succeeds, every stage of production has the potential to strengthen another part of the economy. A farmer sells rice. A local mill processes it. A packaging company prepares it for stores. A transport business delivers it across the country. Retailers sell it to families. Banks finance expansion. Young technicians repair harvesting equipment. Local entrepreneurs develop new food brands. Instead of one industry growing alone, several industries begin moving forward together. This is what economists often call the multiplier effect. One investment creates another. One job supports another. One business helps another business grow. That is why supporters believe agriculture should not be measured only by the number of tons harvested. It should also be measured by the number of opportunities created beyond the farm. Imagine a young graduate in Ouagadougou. 10 years ago, he may have believed his future depended on finding work abroad. Today, he begins seeing opportunities closer to home. A logistics company needs new managers. A food processing business is hiring technicians. A warehouse requires inventory specialists. A cooperative is searching for financial advisors. An agricultural startup is experimenting with digital tools to help farmers improve yields. The economy begins creating choices that did not exist before. In rural communities, the change may feel even more personal. When farmers earn more stable incomes, they invest differently. Roofs are repaired. Children stay in school longer. Small shops remain open. Motorcycles are replaced with delivery trucks. New wells are drilled. Local markets become busier. These are often the first visible signs of economic confidence returning. Of course, no transformation happens overnight. Supporters understand that challenges remain. Weather can affect harvests. Global commodity prices can change unexpectedly. Infrastructure still requires investment. Electricity, irrigation, financing, and transportation all influence whether this vision can become reality. The difference is that many people now believe those challenges are worth solving because the reward reaches far beyond one growing season. Instead of measuring success by how much food arrives at the border, the discussion becomes, how much value can be created inside the border? That subtle change in thinking may become one of the most important developments of all, because nations rarely become more prosperous simply by consuming more. Many economists argue that lasting prosperity depends on producing more, processing more, and building stronger domestic industries over time. Across Africa, that conversation is becoming increasingly important. Many governments are discussing regional trade, local manufacturing, food security, industrial development, greater resilience against external economic shocks. Whether Burkina Faso's current strategy ultimately achieves all of its goals remains to be seen, but it has already contributed to a broader discussion about what economic independence could look like in practice. Not isolation, not closing the door to international trade, but participating in global markets from a stronger position, supported by more competitive domestic industries. That distinction matters, because countries with stronger local production are often better prepared to respond when global supply chains become uncertain. And that brings us to an even larger question. If Burkina Faso succeeds in strengthening its agricultural value chain, how might neighboring countries respond? Could similar ideas spread across West Africa? Could regional trade become stronger as more countries invest in processing their own agricultural products? Or will global competition make that journey far more difficult than many expect? History has shown that economic transformations rarely remain inside one country's borders. they often influence an entire region. And in the next chapter, we explore how the United States, Europe, and the wider international community may view Burkina Faso's changing economic direction and whether this local agricultural strategy could have implications far beyond Africa. As Burkina Faso continues pursuing greater food self-reliance, the conversation naturally extends beyond its own borders. Because in today's economy, no country develops in isolation. Every major policy sends signals to investors, neighboring governments, development institutions, and trading partners. For decades, many African economies have relied on exporting raw materials while importing large volumes of finished goods, including food. At the same time, many developed economies have focused on strengthening their own supply chains after experiencing disruptions caused by the pandemic, inflation, and geopolitical tensions. Although every country's circumstances are different, one common lesson has emerged. Food security has become a strategic priority. That is why Burkina Faso's agricultural strategy is being watched with interest, not because it guarantees success, but because it represents one possible approach to reducing long-term dependence on imported staple foods. Across West Africa, governments continue discussing regional trade, agricultural productivity, and stronger local industries through initiatives such as the African Continental Free Trade Area. If domestic production expands across multiple countries, regional trade could become more diversified, creating new opportunities for businesses operating within Africa. For many supporters of African economic integration, this is an encouraging possibility. Instead of exporting raw agricultural products and importing processed food, more value could remain within African economies. More processing could happen closer to where crops are grown. More regional businesses could compete across neighboring markets. That vision reflects a broader aspiration shared by many policymakers across the continent. At the same time, international observers will likely evaluate Burkina Faso's progress using practical measures rather than political slogans. Can production increase consistently? Can local rice remain affordable for consumers? Can infrastructure keep pace with growing demand? Can private investment continue supporting processing, storage, and transportation? These questions matter because sustainable development depends on results measured over many years, not just one successful harvest. From the perspective of the United States and Europe, stronger African agricultural production may also create new opportunities for future commercial partnerships. Growing economies purchase more machinery, require more agricultural technology, invest in transportation systems, expand financial services, increase demand for education and technical expertise. Economic development is rarely a one-way story. When countries become more productive, new forms of international cooperation often become possible. For ordinary citizens across Africa, however, the discussion feels much more personal. Parents hope that their children can build successful careers without feeling forced to leave home. Young entrepreneurs hope their ideas can grow into competitive businesses. Farmers hope that years of hard work will finally generate stable and predictable incomes. Communities hope that local success can inspire confidence in future generations. Perhaps that is why this story has captured attention far beyond one harvest season. It speaks to a much larger question. Can Africa create greater prosperity by adding more value to its own resources before sending them to the world? No single policy can answer that question by itself. No government can transform an economy overnight. But every long journey begins with a first step. Whether Burkina Faso's current strategy becomes a lasting success will depend on consistent investment, productive partnerships, resilient institutions, and the determination of millions of people working toward the same goal. The coming years, not the coming weeks, will provide the clearest answers. But if this approach continues gaining momentum, could Burkina Faso become an example that encourages other African nations to strengthen their own agricultural industries? And if that happens, will the next chapter of Africa's economic story be written not only in government offices, but also in the rice fields, factories, warehouses, and marketplaces where ordinary people quietly build prosperity one harvest at a time? Before we close, there is one final question that reaches beyond economics itself. If this moment marks the beginning of a new chapter for Burkina Faso, what must happen next to ensure that today's ambition becomes tomorrow's lasting reality? So, after everything we have explored, let us return to the question we asked at the very beginning. Was this really just a rice policy? Perhaps not. Perhaps it was the beginning of a much larger conversation about confidence. Confidence in local farmers. Confidence in local businesses. Confidence in young entrepreneurs. and perhaps most importantly, confidence that Burkina Faso can create more value from its own land, its own people, and its own determination. The road ahead will not be easy. No country transforms its agricultural economy overnight. Harvests can fail. Weather can change. Markets can fluctuate. Infrastructure takes years to build. Investment requires patience. Every major economic transformation in history has faced setbacks before success. That is why the true measure of this strategy will not be the headlines of tomorrow. It will be the results that families can see 5, 10, and even 20 years from now. If more young people choose to build businesses instead of leaving home, if more farmers earn stable incomes from their own harvests, if more food is processed inside Burkina Faso instead of being shipped abroad for added value, then today's decision may one day be remembered as more than a trade policy. It may be remembered as the moment when a nation decided to invest first in its own potential. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson this story offers. Real economic independence is rarely created by one speech, one law, or one leader alone. It grows through millions of ordinary people who choose, every single day, to plant another field, open another workshop, train another young worker, and believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. Looking ahead, I believe Burkina Faso has an opportunity, not a guarantee, but a genuine opportunity to become an example of how investment in agriculture can support broader economic development when it is matched by education, infrastructure, entrepreneurship, and long-term commitment. If that happens, the story we have followed today may become remembered not as the end of one chapter, but as the beginning of a stronger and more self-reliant future. Perhaps years from now, historians will not remember this period simply because Burkina Faso grew more rice. They may remember it because a country chose hope over dependence, production over hesitation, and long-term vision over short-term comfort. That possibility alone is worth watching, because the future of Burkina Faso will not be written only by government decisions. It will also be written by the determination of its farmers, its workers, its families, and an entire generation that believes Africa's greatest resources are not buried beneath the ground, but live within its people. May God bless Africa. May God bless Burkina Faso. May God grant wisdom, peace, and strength to everyone working for a more prosperous future. And may He bless all those who sincerely support justice, cooperation, and the peaceful development of Africa. If this story gave you a new perspective, we would truly like to hear from you. Do you believe Burkina Faso's path toward greater food, self-reliance, can inspire other African nations? Or what do you think will be the biggest challenge on that journey? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Your perspective may help others see this story from a different angle. If you found value in today's discussion, please like the video, subscribe for more in-depth analysis on Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, and Africa's economic future, and share this video with someone who cares about Africa's development. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may hope continue to grow one harvest, one family, and one generation at a time.